Hey guys, welcome back. Drip Coach here with Drip and Farm for Poverty, where we don't trust, we verify, and operate with integrity and transparency. In today's video, we're going to do a recap on the issues that have been going around social media with Jerome Powell and the potential likelihood of him stepping down or resigning, and that the firing is more than likely off the table. But most importantly, why this is actually important, especially for those in risk assets and more specifically into Bitcoin. So let's get that recap from Pump.
Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that Jerome Powell, the leader of the Federal Reserve, he's been behind the curve for years. Go back to 2020. Remember when he was on TV almost every day saying that inflation was going to be transitory? That was wrong. Then he told the market that he was going to keep interest rates really low for a long period of time. All of a sudden, they started to actually hike interest rates more than 500 basis points, which was the fastest pace in history. And now interest rates, they're way too high. The American economy and people who are trying to buy homes and businesses, they want to have lower interest rates, but Jerome Powell won't do it. So now all of a sudden, we're getting immense pressure coming out of the White House for Jerome Powell to resign. Donald Trump, Bill Pulte, and many others, they are destroying Jerome Powell on social media. They're tweeting at him day after day after day. They're trying to build public support to actually get him out of that seat. But here's the thing. I don't think he's going to leave. One of the pressure points that they're pushing on right now is the Federal Reserve is doing a $2.5 billion renovation of the Federal Reserve building. Marble floors, nice wood paneled offices, all the things that you would expect in a government building when they're spending somebody else's money. But to put this in context, the Federal Reserve is going to spend that $2.5 billion. That's more than the Dallas Cowboys spent on their state-of-the-art stadium. That's insane. But here's why I don't.
and that's the stuff that that kicked Elon's ass with Doge. It's just like the system is just so inherently corrupt, man, and just leans towards ridiculous spending that no matter what you do, you can't stop it. And that goes back to Lynn Alden's statement, nothing stops this train. Those of us that, live in this debt-based system and have been privy to using debt, as well as those with their hands on that button, are just a junkie. It's like the studies they've done with rats, putting them in cages and letting them just get hits of cocaine or even sugar, and they just keep getting that bump. The entire economy is that exact same way. This ties into Jeff Booth's statement about the natural state of free market is deflation, and that we've never lived in a globally free market. And that's why we can't wrap our head around how to fix it and how Bitcoin is outside the system and it can fix it, because it's just rampant fraud, waste, and abuse, and hands on the money printer, like no matter where you look.
I don't think that Jerome Powell's going anywhere. I don't think he's going to resign, and I don't think that Trump's going to fire him. Donald Trump and the White House, they ran a little op yesterday. They actually tested the market on whether they should fire him. All of a sudden, we saw in the news, all over the headlines, that there was a leak out of the White House, that Donald Trump was preparing to fire Jerome Powell, that there was a letter that had been written, that he was ready to do it. What was the market reaction? It immediately tanked. The market started to go down, and that gave the negative feedback to the White House that if you fire Jerome Powell, it's going to lead to a market not being happy about it. And so what did Donald Trump do almost immediately? Within 2 hours, he was on TV giving an interview, and he immediately reassured everyone that he's not going to do anything.
So, no, we're not planning on doing anything. We're very concerned. He's doing a little renovation for $2.5 billion of the Fed, building a renovation, and they have a close to $900 million cost overrun. And it's a shame, but the biggest cost overrun is the cost overrun for interest rates, because we should be paying 3 points lower.
He knows that Jerome Powell's term is up in 7 or 8 months. All he's got to do is wait it out. And so that type of leaking the information, getting the feedback, and then making a decision, that's how a lot of politicians operate. And so once you understand that dynamic, you then can start to look at the news a lot differently. And that is why I don't think Jerome Powell's going anywhere until the end of his term.
That was a key statement for me. It's like, I don't pay too much attention to the news and all that stuff. I definitely get my news from guys like Pomp and Jack and Jerome Powell and all that stuff. But exactly what he said, politicians like to test their theories or whatever it is they're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, they want to make sure they still get paid, they stayed in power. So they can't just arbitrarily, swing left and right. They have to figure out what best way to move forward. And technically, this is nothing more than marketing 101. So if you've done any marketing or advertising, you know that you split test your ideas on your audience to see how they're going to respond. So you can have one headline that says one thing and another headline that says something else. You use different colors, and you're ultimately trying to gauge and put a pulse on what the response to your narrative is going to be when you put this out there. And then once you get a positive response with a decent ratio, then you crank up the ad spend. Well, this is no different. They're like, well, we're going to fire Jerome Powell. Let's see what the market's think. Oh shit, the market's didn't like that. Okay, we're not going to fire him. And Trump has been doing this forever, but now he's kind of pushed from firing him, that narrative, to basically putting the pressure on getting him to quit. So you got all these articles. Trump calls on U.S. central bank heads to quit immediately. And he does a lot of his stuff on Truth Social. So yeah, the Fed chair should be investigated by Congress, and wants him to resign. Then this article over here on Bloomberg, Fed chair should be investigated. Contenders to succeed Powell slam Fed chair as White House pressures intensify. So they're definitely trying to get him to step down rather than get fired, because that will have a much better sentiment, so to speak, And then this article, or this Watcher Guru headline, I don't know where it actually comes from. Fed Chair Jerome Powell is not denying reports that he is considered resigning federal housing director, Pulte says. So, I don't know. But the absolute worst case scenario is that Powell stays in until May of next year. And the cool thing I like about it is that Bitcoin is no longer responding to the BS, so to speak. So, yeah, it fluctuates a little bit, but the main thing Bitcoin is responsive to, not just clickbait headlines, it is liquidity. Are you going to be injecting liquidity? Are you going to be pulling liquidity back? And that's what we want. That is the clearest and cleanest indicator for us to make moves in crypto. So for the last couple of days, yeah, there was some swings, but man, it has been holding strong at this one high teens level, we'll call it. So it went back up and tested that 120, or we got new all-time highs actually. And then now it's doing this consolidation, man, between 115 and 120. Like, this is great. I'm loving it. Like, that is, to me, the absolute best thing that can happen with BTC. Like I was telling you guys, like, we don't actually want it to rip. Yes, it looks good for our portfolios and we feel good about that quote unquote dollar value. But if you're pricing your portfolio in sats, you know that your dollar cost average is now buying less sats. So that's not quite as bullish as this slow grind upwards, which has people kind of on the fences, not sure what's going to happen and where we're at. So to recap the interest rate, so this is what's happening right now with Powell. So Powell's term ends May 2026. And right now we have $29 trillion. And there's almost 9 trillion that needs to be rolled over. That comes out to interest costs of about 377 trillion to 377 billion, sorry. We're not quite at 300 trillion dollars. And in that 10-month time frame between now and him getting resigning next year at the end of his term, that's the cost right there, 314 billion, 330 billion. So, and here's the cost savings annually if the rates were cut. So for every 25, we'll call it every 1% cut, you're almost saving $100 billion. So the 3% that Trump wants would be a cost savings of around $300 billion annually. And the impact, this is what's most important, because you may not understand, like, yeah, what are rate cuts, what are cutting rates doing, and how important is that? But for the average American, you can basically look at rate cuts is the interest rate established by the Fed is the rate at which you can borrow money. So you always want to borrow money, ideally at the lowest actual interest rate possible, because that means the amount you have to pay on that debt is lower versus if it's higher. So for every, I think 25%, I'm sorry, 0.5%, there you go, that they cut, you'd save a couple $100 on a $300,000 mortgage. But that also affects credit cards, and that will also be seen in things like lending. Because the Fed affects the global rates that other central banks are also loaning out and borrowing money. Because remember, that's all tied to US treasuries. And the government is always trying to find other people to buy their debt. So why would you want to borrow or buy the US debt if the interest rates are so damn high and you're losing money as you're holding it? So right now, lending has some of the highest rates in the industry for loans, but remember, they're one of the most secure. So cutting rates could have the lend and borrow rate be reduced as well, which would be super bullish. I'd love to see this in single digits, man, like 9%. But actually, it doesn't really matter because I'm just planning on rolling this anyway. Like, I don't plan on paying this off. I do want to combine these two. So I'm going to wait till BTC pumps and then repay and then put them together into one loan. I don't like actually having two different ones. That is one thing I do like with Morpho, but don't know if they're quite as trustworthy. So no, let's go back to our last recap here. So you can look at the impact on BTC rate cuts. Obviously, any rate cut, we can see lift the BTC's price 10 to 20% in 6 months if you get a 0.5%. So essentially, cutting rates turns the money printer back on. So right now, we don't know what'll happen. But as I showed you guys, if Powell stays in, the markets, or specifically BTC, has already priced that in. So it will just continue to chop and consolidate around here. And don't forget that Besant and what they're doing over with treasuries and now with the Stablecoin Act, they've already found other ways to offload that debt. So we don't need Powell fired, resigning, or leaving anytime soon. We're going to get BTC grinding higher because they've figured out other ways to inject liquidity into the system. The rate cuts is just the clearest indicator of a quote unquote bull market. So to me, the absolute bullish thing is that Powell stays and things chop around here. We may see, as this says, BTC test back down to the high 90s, or this it says 80s to 90s. I don't believe that, but who knows? But either way, that is still bullish momentum. Even if it goes back down to the 80s. Remember, we were at the low 70s last cycle. That was the high. So coming back and testing these out just gives you another chance to buy BTC if this happened, and then trust and believe when Powell leaves and somebody else comes in that cuts rates, BTC is just going to rip right past where it's at right now. So like, I don't see a negative outcome no matter what. So this is super bullish in my humble opinion. And stay humble, stack sats, live daily, and achieve your impossible. See ya.